What was it that turned hunter-gatherers into empire builders? I'm travelling through the awe-inspiring landscape of Guilin in South China in search of the key to their success. This is the Zhangpian Cave. Excavations here tell us it was once lived in by hunter-gatherers. And in 2001, a wonderful discovery was made.
These fragments are so precious that I'm not even allowed to touch them. They are what remains of one of the oldest pots in China. In fact, one of the oldest pots in the world. So who made this pot? Well, the people living in this cave so many thousands of years ago would have been nomadic hunter-gatherers, still living an ancient lifestyle in many ways. But those insignificant-looking, crude pieces of pot mark a great technological leap forward.
So prehistoric pottery's also been found in this cave?
Pots are something we take for granted. But for those ancient hunter-gatherers, pottery was part of a completely new way of life. So how did they do it? I'm meeting a team of experimental archaeologists who think they might have the answer. The first breakthrough must have been finding out how to stop the pots cracking when they were fired, tempering them by mixing calcite rock with the clay. And they even have an idea how the pots might have been shaped thousands of years before the invention of the potter's wheel.
This is very clever. They've dug a pit here to basically give us the form of the pot, almost like a mould. And then we're pressing this clay in little slabs down into the pre-formed pit.
Transforming clay into hard pottery requires firing at a high temperature. Today, this is done at 1,000 degrees Celsius in a kiln, way beyond the capabilities of those hunter-gatherers. They would have had open fires, which only produce temperatures of about 250 degrees. I'm quite doubtful this is going to be enough. So how's our pot?
Ooh, I think that's it. I think that's our pot there, and it looks okay. Fantastic.
There are many different theories about why the Chinese hunter-gatherers might have started making pots. Some people say it was a symbol of prestige, but the Chinese archaeologists think that the explanation is much more simple: cooking.
Pots meant that a wider range of food could be cooked and stored, vital in hard times. And by 9,000 years ago, there was another innovation: farming.
One of the things that those early Chinese potters would have been eating was wild rice. Now, it certainly wouldn't have been the main source of food because it was hard to collect and actually didn't give much energy in return. But despite the availability of other vegetables, it was rice that became more and more important and even crucial to the early success of the Chinese.
St. Petersburg, the former imperial capital of Russia. The Hermitage is one of the world's greatest museums, home to some of the most celebrated works of art. But there's something else here too. It's not on display, but it's every bit as precious. Here in the storerooms are a few objects that could unlock the secrets of those Siberian families struggling in the depths of the Ice Age.
What is really striking about these objects from the height of the last Ice Age is that they're found in just a few places in the south of Siberia, which is interesting because it suggests that as the climate worsened, these prehistoric people retreated into refuges where it still would have been very cold, but they would have been just able to survive.
People vanished from the frozen wastes of northern Siberia. To the south, one of the refuges they gathered in is now called Maltar. So can the few remains found here tell us anything about what happened?
Just look at these tiny blades from the Ice Age. They are unusually small, and the archaeologists think this is because the appalling cold made it difficult to reach the quarries. So the stone itself was such a precious resource that they were using it to its utmost, getting as many blades as they could out of it. So the blades themselves got smaller and smaller. And something extraordinary was happening during this period. In spite of that struggle for survival, there was a blossoming of art. Now, we may never know the meaning of this beautiful pair of swans to the people that made them, but archaeologists have suggested that they might be hunting charms, that when the first swans flew, the first deer would appear, and it was the beginning of the spring hunting season. And how they must have longed for spring.
Many of the objects in this collection are mysterious. This unique plate is made from mammoth ivory. Some have suggested it's a map showing the physical and spiritual worlds, with a connection between them symbolised by a hole in the middle. These precious bone figurines are amongst the earliest depictions of people wearing fur. Further proof that plenty of these Asian pioneers could sew clothes by this time.
And finally, there are these delicate and beautiful little statues of women, and some of them are pierced, so they may have been worn as pendants, perhaps amulets. It's possible that they're fertility symbols, really underlining the importance and difficulty of producing children during such harsh conditions. And in fact, some archaeologists see this entire, very beautiful collection as a cry to the spirits in a time of stress and struggle. This is a reconstructed Neanderthal skeleton, and generally speaking, the skeleton is very similar to ours. Having said that, there are definite differences. The shape of all the bones is subtly different, and anywhere that muscles attach on this skeleton is much more prominent than it would be in a modern human. So this would have been a person who was much more heavily muscled, generally much more rugged looking than us today.
They would have been formidable competitors.
So Neanderthals were tougher and better cold adapted than us, and some of them even had bigger brains than modern humans. On the face of it then, it seems quite surprising that our species lasted very long at all.
So how did we overcome the Neanderthals? Maybe our tools and weapons were just better than theirs. Well, for decades, that's exactly what the experts thought. But this idea hadn't been thoroughly tested until now.
So how
How are you doing?
Oh, doing all right.
Bruce Bradley and Metin Erin spent over a year making thousands of basic cutting tools.
So we've got these two tools. This one, a basic tool made by a Neanderthal, and this one, a basic tool made by a modern human at the same sort of period.
Correct.
Now, they're obviously very different looking. This one's long and thin, and this one is round. But are they different in terms of function, in terms of what they're used for?
They were used for the same kind of tasks, mostly cutting tasks.
So, for example, I mean, both are really sharp. If you want to use both of those to cut, some pretty thick leather here.
This is a typical Neanderthal tool.
Exactly. You can see that it just cuts through this really thick leather very easily.
That is incredibly sharp. Look at that. Wow.
And this is really tough leather.
Effective, isn't it?
So,
that's brilliant.
Yeah. Now let's try the blade.
Hold it very carefully.
Yes. This is the sort of thing that was made by modern humans.
Exactly.
If anything, I would say that flake is a bit, I mean, that's cutting, but just, you know, just picking up the tool and using it immediately, I'd say the flake's actually a little bit easier to use.
When we created thousands of tools, we found that the technology of the Neanderthals actually produced more cutting edge overall. It wasted less raw material, and you could produce more tools than the blade cores of modern Homo sapiens.
Now, Martin, that's very new, isn't it? It's quite remarkable, because you're telling me that the Neanderthal technology is just as good, in fact, if not better, than the modern humans. I mean, that goes against everything that people have said for the last few decades.
That's true, and it was a very exciting result.
It's just one study on one aspect of tool making. But I still think it's important.
This is fascinating, and it means that the long-standing theory about modern human technology being superior to Neanderthal stone tools just doesn't stand up.
There are clearly an awful lot of weapons around at this time, but I do wonder how many of them were for use and how many of them were for show. Because there's very little evidence of actual violence, the sort of evidence that we've got from Tor Martin. Now, this shield might give us a clue, because it's very lovely, but a shield is supposed to be something that's for defence. This is made of metal that's only 0.5 millimetre thick. It's beautiful, but it's absolutely useless. This shield was clearly for display only. But what about all the spears and swords of the time? Was their only purpose to make their owners look good? At Sheffield University, that theory has been severely tested. Sue Bridgeford's test rig consistently simulates the powerful slashing blows of one Bronze Age sword edge against another. And her results lead her to believe that these were indeed very violent times.
We definitely have an impact. That is bowed and I think chipped, which is reasonably what you would expect, because this is actually a very hard edge, so it tends to be brittle and bits of metal do come off.
Sue's test samples are made from bronze of the same composition as Bronze Age finds from Britain. And Sue's found evidence of identical damage on the edges of real Bronze Age weapons. Sue, I've always had the impression with beautiful bronze swords like this that they were mainly just for show rather than being used. But are you saying that you've got evidence that they have been used in anger?
Oh, the evidence is on the swords themselves. As you can see on the damage to the edge here, it's got a couple of tears there. But most of the thing is just a distortion of the blade.
And is this the sort of evidence that you found on the experimental blades that you've made?
Yeah. All the angled blows gave this sort of distortion. And those are the ones that you get most commonly when you're actually fighting with swords.
How many of the swords that you've looked at have got this sort of damage?
I've looked at about 600 odd swords, and at least 50% have damage that is consistent with the experimental replication of how they would have been used in sword fighting, sword to sword.
I mean, do you think all Bronze Age weapons were probably used then? They weren't just made for show?
I think a very small minority were used for show. the vast majority were made as serious weapons. You know, they were used to kill people.
There's something else we can find out about these weapons, where they were made, and for that we need to look at the composition of the bronze. Bronze is an alloy of copper and tin. There were around 10 copper mining districts active in Bronze Age Britain, and one of the most impressive is in North Wales. The rocky headland known as the Great Orme is riddled with the tunnels of ancient mines, where the copper, unusually, is mildly radioactive.
This is the malachite, the copper carbonate.
The copper ore shines green in the rock. Tin, the other main ingredient of bronze, was found in Devon and Cornwall. Grains of heavy black tin ore can still be captured today by panning moorland streams.
Right. That's what they were after, is it? That's what they were after.
So what is the composition of our Tormarton spearhead? What can it tell us? I took it to Oxford University's Department of Materials for assessment. Peter Northover will compare the chemical composition of our spearhead with a database of over 10,000 samples of ancient bronze to find out when our spearhead was made and where the raw materials came from. Peter and his colleagues have shown that at different times in history, bronze has been made with varying ratios of copper and tin, as well as nickel, arsenic and other trace elements. They've also pinpointed the characteristic proportions of elements that identify different copper and tin mines across Europe.
Low cobalt, so it's nothing to do with the southwest of England.
He can now compare our spearhead with the samples in his database.
The results tell a nice, coherent story, pretty well tracking the object from when it was copper right to when it was a spearhead stuck in somebody's back.
So how old is it?
I think originally we're looking at something like the 14th century BC. The other key point of the composition is two impurities, nickel and arsenic, which you can trace across quite a large part of northwest Europe, origin roughly eastern Switzerland, western Austria.
You're talking about Switzerland though, but this seems bizarre when you've got these huge copper mines here and they're bringing copper all the way from Switzerland.
Certainly there is no way it could come from the Great Orme, because the Great Orme just doesn't have that level of nickel and arsenic in it. We believe the copper was mined and smelted in the Eastern Alps, eastern Switzerland, western Austria, refined, made into bronze with tin, and then made into tools, weapons, ornaments, and then traded in stages across France, traded as scrap across the Channel, and then up to Tormarton area, and it may well have been made into a spearhead somewhere relatively close to Tormarton.
So they're importing scrap bronze,
yes.
not the actual copper then?
Scrap bronze, rather than trading off into these damp and windswept parts of the British Isles, just to buy some scrap from the guy down the road.
So the bronze that ended up in the Tormarton spearhead came to Britain as scrap metal from mainland Europe about 1400 BC. This isn't as far-fetched as it sounds. In 1974, close to Dover Harbour, divers discovered the sunken wreck of a Bronze Age ship that was carrying over 60 kilos of well-worn bronze tools from France to be traded as scrap in Britain. So the people in Tormarton weren't living in isolation. They were part of a vast trade network that spread across Europe, a network that supplied scrap bronze to be reworked into fighting weapons. I went to see the British Museum's Iron Age curator, J.D. Hill.
One of the odd things about this gallery is that it's full of objects from graves, and when people think of a typical Iron Age burial, we often see pictures of this, the Welling Garden City burial.
Pretty wealthy to me.
This is an extremely wealthy burial, but the bulk of Britain from 1000 BC onwards, we don't actually find enough dead people to represent the population. The funerals in Iron Age Britain for the bulk of the population involves not putting dead people in the ground.
But this is a whole skeleton, and a whole skeleton buried in a pit with a load of rubbish. So how do we explain that?
There must be something about the way that person died, or who that person was, which was special, which marked them out to being buried, disposed of potentially, in a very, very different way than anyone else living in that village or community. Are they people who have something about them in terms of their personality, perhaps in terms of their physical appearance, which marks them out as somehow different? Are they some person who's met their death in a strange and unusual way? Are they suicides? Are they been struck by lightning? But the other possibility is that these are not people who've died of natural causes or of illness or of accident, but these are people who have been deliberately killed by their community sacrifices.
So why was our person marked out as being special? Perhaps there's a clue in the bones, which have now been examined by Durham University's Charlotte Roberts.
I think this is a woman. I think...
Why do you say you think that it's
Well, we've got a skeleton here that is not fully mature. And here in the pelvis, if you look at the sciatic notch, it's quite wide, which you'd expect in a female, but the pelvis isn't totally developed and fused, so it's a bit dangerous to say it's positively female.
I thought that we were probably dealing with, what, a teenager? Somebody of that sort of age here?
I think she's about 16, 17.
So is there anything on the skeleton that would tell us how she died?
Absolutely nothing, but a lot of things that would cause people's death would be related just to soft tissues. The only thing I can see on the skeleton that gives an indication of her health are on these ribs. And what we've got here is some bone formation down here and also along here. It's actual new bone that's been formed as a response to inflammation. It could be pleurisy, inflammation of the pleural cavity. It could be an infectious disease like tuberculosis. It could be the result of pneumonia. It could be the result of chronic bronchitis.
And there's no way that we can tell whether or not this girl was sacrificed or died a natural death?
No, well, there's certainly nothing here to tell me that.
So the bones give no indication of why this girl was special. But perhaps there's something about her appearance that's out of the ordinary. At Manchester University, her face is going to be reconstructed by Caroline Wilkinson.
Well, this is the girl's skull from Bourton-on-the-Water. You can see some of it's missing. Part of the nasal bone is missing, but the majority of the skull is intact. There is some asymmetry in the lower jaw. You can see when you view it from the front that the centre of her chin is heading off to her right, although her teeth are in a central position. The asymmetry has to be quite marked on the skull for it to show up noticeably on the face. All of us have asymmetrical faces. Her asymmetry isn't marked enough that she would be particularly unusual. You can see here there's quite a lot of peg showing above the muscle, which is where the subcutaneous fat will be held in the face. So this layer of clay represents these buccal fat pads that fill out an adolescent face and make it appear more chubby and more smooth-skinned and rounded than an adult face.
The Great Temple of Seti I. Pilgrims came here believing that Abydos was the burial place of Osiris, the Egyptian god of the dead. This area is the most sacred place in all of ancient Egypt. The burial place of the very first Egyptian kings 5,000 years ago.
What's drawn us to Abydos is the prospect of finding something that every Egyptologist secretly dreams about, an undiscovered intact royal tomb. Probably not on the scale of Tutankhamun, but you'll never know unless you look.
Sarah has set up camp on the edge of Abydos's royal graveyard. It overlooks the valley in the eastern desert cliffs, known throughout ancient Egypt as the gateway to the afterlife. Sarah's hoping her satellite imagery will reveal what over 100 years of traditional archaeology has failed to uncover, one of the missing tombs of the very first kings. I'm meeting archaeologist Dr. Gunter Dreyer, who's been working here for 30 years. He wants to show me his current dig.
Actually, this is the earliest royal burial ground of Egypt.
Right.
The earliest rulers of Egypt, pre-dynastic ones, and the rulers of the first and second dynasty are buried here, about 3000 BC. We are in the very heart of the beginning of Egyptian culture here.
Wow, that is a lot of pottery.
These sherds are fragments of late period offerings, because the ancient Egyptians came here by the millions and left offering vessels here. We roughly estimated all together maybe about 10 million pots.
Gunter is investigating the first dynasty tomb of King Jair. It was originally excavated in the late 19th century.
So how would it work? So can you just sort of take me through the layout of this?
Yeah, well, there's a huge chamber with brick lining, and in the middle of that chamber there was a large wooden shrine.
Right.
Supported by these protruding walls, cell walls, and they also form a little storerooms for equipment.
Jair's tomb was once covered by a mound of earth. It was a forerunner of the pyramids. The Great Pyramid is the only survivor of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. It was the final resting place of the pharaoh Khufu.
Well, this is a tight fit.
"800 years later, the pyramid builders at Saqqara must have learnt many lessons from this masterpiece. Constructed using 2 million blocks, the Great Pyramid weighs 5 million tons. It rises at a constant angle of 51 degrees to reach the height of a 35-story building. All built in less than 15 years using soft copper tools and a simple plumb line. Inside is a complex network of passageways linking the entrance to the burial chamber deep within.
God, look at this. Oh my goodness.
Amazing.
So where are we here? I mean, this is just extraordinary, this...
The Grand Gallery.
This is the Grand Gallery.
The most fascinating structure on Earth.
The function of the 8.5-metre high ceiling remains a mystery to this day. The pyramid is one of the most explored monuments in human history, but it kept a secret for 4,500 years. In the roof of the Grand Gallery is a passageway that until 170 years ago led nowhere. Only blasting with gunpowder revealed 5 more cramped chambers stacked one on top of the other. The topmost has a triangular ceiling designed to take the load of the thousands of tons of limestone above. Few people are allowed here these days.
Okay. Are you here?
Yep.
Now I need to tell you some important things here. Wow. Combine my left side here. You know, this is the top 5th chamber. This is the last one.
The very top.
Then this room has been found by English.
This is the story of
the people who actually, in the last 3 centuries, used to come to explore the pyramid and write their names and year and things like that. Now I'm going to take you to this big surprise here. Follow me.
The graffiti in this chamber isn't all the work of intrepid explorers.
Mr. Dallas, look at this. This letter in hieroglyphic means gang, and look at Simsu, means followers.
Yeah.
And this is the cartouche of Khufu. Then the name of the gang who built the pyramid were called the Followers Gang of Khufu.
So this graffiti is 4,500-year-old graffiti?
4,500 years ago, left by the workmen who built the pyramid.
I can't imagine another room on Earth that has such historical significance. Not just historical significance, actually, such scientific significance. The science, you've got this vaulted ceiling, which as an engineering project means so much. It's supporting the weight of the pyramids. It's extraordinary they had that technology 4,500 years ago. And then with obviously history, you've got the history of the pyramid itself, which we know. But within this room itself, you have these fantastic stories. Obviously, the other people who've been here before. This is amazing. It's special. This is off the scale.
A team from Cairo University begins drilling into the mud to obtain core samples. In such a large area, though, coring is a bit of a lottery. A few centimetres in the wrong direction might miss the telltale piece of pottery or the treasure that's remained undisturbed for centuries. And after 3,500 years of annual flooding, the evidence will be deeply buried. Already, the corer has dug down 5 metres.
Hi, Bettina. Hi, Judith.
Hello. Hi, Dallas.
How are you doing?
Oh, we're having fun.
Have you found anything of note? I've got a very nervous Sarah Parkak here. She's gone all quiet and silent.
We found lots of mud, and it's absolutely packed with pottery. It's not so obvious, but you can see there, but we've actually picked loads of this out already. This is 6 metres down, so yeah, we must be a fair way back. I mean, the sort of general ballpark figure is 1 metre per 1,000 years, so we'd be thinking we were several thousand years back.
Look at that.
Oh,
nice
well
job,
done.
Dallas.
It's not. Is it a rim?
This is my Indiana Jones. It belongs in a museum.
Did you find a rim? Is it rim?
It's
No.
not rim.
It's not.
No, unfortunately not. It's very satisfying doing this.
It's lovely,
It's really
isn't
good.
it? Straight back to kindergarten.
Yeah, no, exactly.
It's going to take time to date all this pottery and sift through the mud to make sure we don't miss anything. Will we find more than just the rubbish from an old village? Is there any evidence of the lost capital city? The following day, Sarah and I are back. Have they been able to find anything? They've certainly dug up a huge amount of pottery. It's from the right date, it's definitely Middle Kingdom, but it could still be from a small village.
I mean, is there anything sort of, you know, in your boxes that sort of suggests this is a lost city rather than just any old settlement?
Starting to find things like carnelian chips, which straight away raises the status of what's going on.
That is very interesting.
Why is that interesting?
Well, we call it a semi-precious stone, but it was much prized for making of amulets and decorative inlays.
Oh, OK, so this is evidence that this has been worked and people are using this material to make jewellery, that sort of thing.
Then we've got this beautiful piece of agate.
Oh, wow. Look at that. This is incredibly unusual.
Yeah, no, that's quite rare.
To find this in a core is extraordinary.
And this is the jewel in the crown.
The jewel in the crown.
Never before found in a core in Egypt. We've got a piece of amethyst for you.
Oh, my goodness. Wow. That is beautiful.
So that is pretty rare in Egypt altogether. I mean, even in jewellery, amethyst is quite rare.
That's amazing. I mean, we're dealing with incredibly high status.
These are high rollers.
That's incredible. I mean, to find something like this in a core.
Sorry. This is Egyptian bling.
Yeah.
Happy? Happiness?
I have to admit, I wasn't expecting this. Get a core rich with pottery, and then to find amethyst and agate and worked carnelian in the same core. This is very exciting. You hit the jackpot. I feel like I've hit the jackpot. For a long time, Egyptologists have said, well, it's you know, the city is too far buried, we'll never get to it. And yet, to find something like this, we're on to something big here.
Something big. Wow, look at this. So is this the front door?
Yeah, so now we're entering from the east side to the solar temple of New Sera from the 5th dynasty. And here is exactly the main entrance. It's a corridor, big corridor, coming, we're close, we don't see the sun yet.
No.
And suddenly you come out here in the courtyard and you have the sun, shocking you.
Once this temple was bustling with people making offerings and priests performing ceremonies.
Look at this. This is the floor. Let's climb up.
This is actually what they'd be walking on. My goodness. And this is.
Were they walking, or were they on their knees? It is written in the walls just behind there and there. You have to be on your knees. In fact, it is exactly like the pilgrimage.
That pilgrimage culminated in offerings for the sun god Ra, delivered to the central altar. This is the original from 4,500 years ago.
Here we shall come with the main offering, and there we shall put it here. In the middle you see this round circle. This is Ra. This is Ra.
The temple dedicated to Ra was a religious focus and an important source of wealth. The offerings were redistributed to the thousands of people who lived and worked here.
I mean, bringing offering is paying taxes. Well, we are today, we pay all taxes, so that's how it works.
What I've really understood is the fact that the sun is so central to the entire Egyptian worldview, and right here it's utterly manifest in such a simple form. Looking at that table, that offering table, you can see it, the sun right in the middle. It's the center of everything, it's the bringer of life, it's the creator.
Rising above the altar was the dominant structure of the temple, the obelisk, focusing attention on the sun's rays. This was Old Kingdom architecture at its best, simple and striking.
Sarah's satellite archaeology is good at identifying mud brick buried just beneath the surface. But what about stone circles in a vast wilderness of sand? SatNav will help narrow down the location, but then it's down to us to spot them.
Arkak, I don't mean to be funny, but we have been walking for quite a while. Are you sure you know where we're going?
Well, this is the thing that you can never be sure of. Things are looking more promising, very promising. And look at where we are right now.
Where might that be?
Okay, look, you see these large circles?
Sarah may be able to see something, but I'll need some convincing.
From above, you really get a sense of the circles. From here, it's very difficult to make them all out, isn't it?
But is there any other evidence that people once lived here?
And look at this. Look here. Look here. Look. 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 These are tools. These are or evidence of work tools. Look at this. Look at this piece. It's a beautiful piece. It takes an incredible craftsman to know the right angle, the right pressure, and they strike the stone, and you've got a perfect flake, or they work a stone down so you get perfect edges.
The remains of prehistoric human activity are all around us.
What's that, Sarah?
Wow, it's ostrich eggshell. They would have used these ostrich eggshells as vessels for carrying water.
You're kidding.
No, and there's a bunch of it. Whoops, it's all over the place.
Is this another piece here?
Yeah.
Everything suggests this desert wasteland was once a very fertile place. In fact, for thousands of years, communities thrived in the Sahara, settling close to food sources and water that was then here in abundance. Satellites can quickly map hundreds of square kilometers that would have taken years using conventional archaeology. Now we can get a far better picture of how many people lived here in prehistoric times.
This fearsome abyss has been hollowed out over thousands of years by the rivers, and it drops straight down for hundreds of feet. It's still known in Turkish as Cehennem. That's Gehenna, or hell, in Muslim and Christian tradition. And it really would be hell now to try to get to the bottom.
Fortunately, heaven doesn't require a climbing rope. It's a few hundred meters from hell, where stairs lead down into a ravine. In ancient times, saffron crocuses grew here, objects of cult for the ancient Hittites. Modern Turks named this place Cennet, heaven. But beyond heaven is the underground lair of a monster. One of the stories we have of the Hittite snake monster is that at first it defeated the storm god Tahunta, then stole his eyes and heart, which it hid in a cave.
In later Greek myth, Zeus too is defeated at first by the snaky monster in Greek Typhon, on Mount Cassius itself, we're told. And Typhon cuts away the god's sinews using an adamantine sickle, wraps them up in a bearskin, and conceals them in his lair, the Corycian cave. If we consider the story in its real context, we can understand for the first time how and when the story passed to the Greeks and then grew.
Visible beyond the remains of this Christian church is the Corycian cave of the Greek myth. At its mouth, there's actually an inscription which identifies it, although it dates from some 600 years after the Greek Dark Ages. To protect it from damage, it has been concealed, and its location is known only to the cave's Turkish guardian, Ghazi. He's agreed to uncover it for me. I'm the first scholar to see it in years.
In 1896, an inscription was reported here. It's absolutely thrilling. We've managed to find it again, as far as I can see. Beautifully cut. Greek lettering. This really is the lifeblood of ancient history. This is what we rely on, and we're finding it straight in front of us. And it looks as though it's lines of verse by one Eupaphis, who is in the dells of and the cave. We'll have to wait till the lines are clearer.
After a couple of hours of digging, all 4 lines of verse are revealed. Wary of going into the depths, Eupaphis wrote his verses and had them inscribed on this beautifully dressed stone.
And what he tells us is so important for fixing its context. He tells us how I honoured and propitiated the gods Pan and Hermes. Now that's immensely important because in the story, precisely Pan and Hermes are the gods who rescue the stolen sinews of Zeus. So this is the cave, certainly, where it happened. And he calls it Ein Arimois, in Arima, a name which is going to be so important for our Greek travellers, but which also ties up with the Hittite place name here, Erima, on the map. And he describes how he entered the depths, which are echoing with the sounds of the streams of the river Aoos. So when he was in the bottom, he heard the echoing noise of a river. This is the most unlikely site. How did you ever come to discover there were things to excavate here?
It was an accidental finding of this site when a worker found a very interesting specimen of an Hipparion.
That is an ancient horse, isn't it?
It is an ancient three-toed horse.
Evangelia Tsukala is a paleontologist. With her team, she's been excavating this hillside near Mende and has made some remarkable discoveries.
I can show here a very extraordinary bone.
Yeah, it's the biggest thing I've ever seen. Yeah.
It is a femur of a mastodon.
Oh my goodness, what is it?
It is an ancestor of the mammoth.
Ah, right. I mean, if I look at it knowing nothing, I might think this was the bone of some enormously heavyweight human.
The imagination of the layman is incredible. And I have an example from my excavation in Grevena with the huge mastodons there. And the people there thought that they would become from an elephant from a circus.
From a circus, and they'd escaped. But you persuaded them.
After 20 years, yes.
This hillside has already produced many other giant prehistoric bones.
They must have been a race of gigantic people. What I'm thinking is that the Greeks, the Euboeans, who had been out in Naples and had seen the shattered remains of the battlefield where the gods had zapped the giants with thunderbolts, I can now understand why they come up here and they think this is the camp, this is where the giants bred, where they lived. Once you see it, you can see what the Euboeans concluded. Those things are far bigger than me. They're proof. The poets knew. These are giants. And this is why the whole story is partly located here and partly located on the smouldering volcanoes in Italy. I think it was possibly here that a really important lesson was learned. Somewhere, one day, an inquisitive Euboean sat with a Phoenician and looked and listened while the Phoenician wrote out the letters of his script and described them. And the Greek adapted them and copied them down as letters still in use in the modern Greek alphabet, alpha, beta, gamma, exactly the order which we know Phoenicians used for their own letters, aleph, bet, gamel. The Greek thought he needed signs for the vowel sounds he was hearing, so he added them, epsilon, iota, and so forth, making the fullest alphabet the one which is most easy to read. And it's that Greek alphabet that is the ancestor of all the alphabets we still use in the modern West.
As the alphabet developed, myths could eventually become more fixed as they were written down. But during the Greek Dark Ages, they were still told orally and open to influence. On Cyprus, we can follow this happening to the story of a local fertility goddess. Like other visitors to Amathus, Euboeans encountered her shrine. Her worship here dates as far back as the 2000s BC. Through contact with visitors from the Near East, she then took on a wilder sexual identity. And then, when the Greeks arrived, she became Aphrodite. Jacqueline Karagiorgis has spent her whole life studying the transformations of the goddess of love.
When the Greeks came to the island in the 12th century BC, it seems they found the Oriental goddess and they adopted her because we don't know that they had any Aphrodite in their context.
So a goddess of love and sex is in fact, for the Greeks, an introduction in the early Dark Ages.
Yes, and it seems that the Greeks have changed her from her sexual aspect to the aspect of a goddess of love, of beauty. Beauty is a very Greek element.
You're making this Greek Aphrodite sound as though she lived in Paris. She's sexy and all the rest of it. But Jacqueline, there are said to have been prostitutes here serving the cult of the goddess, at least by Christian sources. Do you believe that?
Well, Herodotus said it was a ritual in Cyprus. He says that girls had to come once in their lifetime to the temple to offer their virginity to the goddess.
And then they kept the money as their dowry,
yes,
is that right?
It was a way of having a an income. I suppose this is why the sanctuary were so rich.
And nowadays their fathers build them a house. To the west of Amathus is another place now associated with Aphrodite. It is known as the Rock of Aphrodite, and the local story is that if you swim all the way round this rock, you are blessed with eternal beauty. The beach alongside is now considered the location of Aphrodite's literal emergence. Of course, the story of Aphrodite is connected to much grander stories in heaven, Jacqueline. When Father Heaven is castrated, of course, blood and white sperm flies everywhere. And according to the Greeks, when the sperm falls down into the sea, somebody very significant is born from it, your goddess, Aphrodite. And the Greeks, when they later thought about it, tried to connect that name, Aphrodite, with their own Greek word, aphros, meaning foam or foaming white sperm. Do you think there was any historical truth in that?
I don't think it's the real etymology of the name, but it's a very clever way of explaining Aphrodite, very poetical one.
Right, like a wordplay.
Yes, like a wordplay.
That was a pretty good way to be born. But there is the local story that when she was born, she was washed to this very beach. This is what the Cyprus Tourist Board still tells you nowadays, Jacqueline. Do you think there's any history in that?
Well, this is a very recent tradition to associate this beach with Aphrodite. We don't have any proof that it was the real place where she came on land in Cyprus, although ancients said that they could see her footprints on the beach, but which beach, we don't know. I have been through travelers' books and to find references to this special beach, but I could not find any references.
When is the first thing, do you think?
Well, I could say during the last 50 years.
But it shows beautifully how what will be a myth, I'm sure, continued in modern Cyprus, begins and starts from a beautiful landscape and then acquires a force of its own, exactly as it did in the ancient world. This is how myths are made. Here, in the storerooms of the Eretria Museum, the shelves are crammed with boxes full of objects excavated by the Swiss School of Archaeology. These finds have given us a clearer picture of the lives of our Euboean travellers and the culture in which the myths we will trace were born.
Okay, Robin, I wanted to show you here 2 sherds with the graffiti.
Early writing.
Early writing. They were found in the sanctuary of Apollo.
Yeah.
The first one's dated from the end of the 9th century, early 8th century. We can see 4 letters.
Well, they're not Greek. I can't understand them. What are they?
They're Semitic.
Good heavens. So this is at the turning point when some Near Easterner has either taught a Euboean to write or Euboean is copying what he's learned perhaps in the Near East.
Absolutely. But it was carved on a Euboean pot. This is a typical Euboean drinking cup.
We're right at the start of the origin of writing. Extraordinary, yes.
And at the end of the series, we have, again, a graffito carved on a local pot, Euboean, with another 4 letters.
I think I can read it. It's Hiera.
Hiere.
Hiere, yes. 4 Greek letters.
Yes.
So what we have is a real moment of transition. We have somebody trying to write Greek in a non-Greek alphabet, and then we have Greek written in the real Greek alphabet. This is an enormous important change. This is really at the root of all Western civilization. I mean, the Greek alphabet, we had then the Roman alphabet, the Etruscan alphabet, our alphabets. If they couldn't write, we wouldn't know anything about them. If they couldn't write down Homer, we wouldn't be able to read his poems. We wouldn't know anything about Hesiod. This is a real change for people, and we're witnessing it in the palm of your hand. Incredible.
Now, I want to show you these 2 seals, which belong to the lyre player group. 5 of them were found in the sanctuary of Apollo. They were found in the northern sacrificial area.
Right.
And where cult is established, cult linked with women.
So this is like a calling card for Euboean women? Well,
yes,
I know.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Talking about Euboean women in the 8th century, we have here the neck of an amphora.
Oh, there they are, dancing.
You can see, yes, or it's a procession.
And they're holding garlands, it looks like, and these very trendy skirts. They've had to breathe in for the painter, anyway. Tight waists, long skirts, 8th century BC fashion. Wonderful.
This is part of a crater, Robin, where you have the typical UBN 8th century iconography.
Right.
With a horse.
Spindly legs, yes, there he is, the four-legged friend. And these aren't farm animals, are they, Sylvan? They don't pull carts. They can't, they haven't got the right collar. These horses they use for competition and, above all, for war. It's a sign of social distinction. It's not just they love animals. You're smart, you're a nobleman, you're one of the horse breeders, the local cavalry. Wonderful.
Now, this was found in the West Quarter, in Eritrea. That's a very important find, and it's a monumental amphora.
Right, which stood then by a grave, would that be right?
Exactly.
And I can see a chariot. It's a sort of chariot race, or on this bit there's somebody they're trying to jump on often on the back of the chariot.
The Aphrodite.
Yeah, this is a sort of Greek game they play where the skill is to jump onto a chariot when it's moving and jump off the back of it.
Probably during funerary games.
Fantastic.
This is going to be special. I've never seen the treasures I've been promised down here before. This is Bayer's Lost Harbour, where the notorious Caligula is said to have reacted to a prophecy that he would never be emperor until he rode on horseback across the water of the bay by tethering 4,000 ships together from this harbour wall and trotting across.
That was my first sighting of the Portus Julius. What's magic is that you can follow the grand monumentality of the lines, the solid masonry that's still there, straight out to sea and then across the bay. You can imagine that those walls doing a pretty good job of protecting the fleet.
Now I want to experience the posh villas, and as these watery gems have sunk even deeper beneath the waves, I'll need to scuba dive for this.
This is absolutely incredible. I could do with a little champagne, I think, at this moment in time. So we're in one of the rooms of one of those posh fancy villa owners, and I am currently in the process of uncovering this gentleman's mosaic floor. If only this mosaic could talk.
The mosaic floor isn't the only treat. The statues in this Roman villa are now faithful replicas so that enthusiasts can still share the magic of this lost world.
There was a wonderful story that in this dining room there was a channel of seawater that the plates of exotic food floated on around the diners. It was the Yosushi moving belt of the ancient world. So there's a wonderful irony that now this is itself underwater, and the fish that once graced the tables now rule supreme down here. I absolutely love it. This is the first time that I've been able to see this underwater world. Lost in time, wrapped in silence, as the sea levels have risen and the earth has fallen.
What a great place to experience.
I was most intrigued by that strange spinal deformity in the burial that I'd worked on.
It's what we call DISH for short, and that stands for diffuse, meaning it's affecting the whole body, idiopathic, which is a horrible term but means we don't know what causes it, skeletal, meaning affecting the skeleton, hyperostosis, meaning bone formation. So these people with DISH are bone formers.
But is it something that happens with age? I mean, how old was this chap when he died?
I think he's certainly over 50. He's elderly.
Yeah.
And yes, it's a condition that affects older people, older males. And in archaeological populations, it's been found in high frequency in monastic populations.
Really?
Yes, generally speaking.
So is this image of the fat jolly friar then actually true? I mean,
maybe it is.
Is there a higher incidence of obese people in monasteries associated with cathedrals at this time?
Nice.
There were other features of the man's skeleton which suggested a long and rather painful life. dish had constricted his neck, making swallowing difficult. There were signs of infection in his shins. His teeth were rotted and covered in plaque. Even his heel had been injured.
This poor chap, I mean, he seems to have got problems everywhere. His neck, his back, his knees, his lower legs, and even his heel. I mean, it's literally head to foot.
Yeah, and even in the left foot, right here on the big toe.
Oh, no, he's not got a toe problem as well. So it really is head to toe.
Yes, it is, yeah. Right,
poor
so.
chap.
There were further puzzles. One of the skeletons was of a child, aged between 7 and 9, and showing signs of a nasty eye infection. And one of the other Chalice burials revealed evidence of a lifestyle surprising for a priest.
But if you look on his head, he's got a little dint in it. See? There.
Oh, yes.
A little depression.
So is that an injury?
Yeah, I think somebody's either hit him on the head or he's fallen onto something or something's fallen on him.
Right.
But along with that, we've got 3 rib fractures.
Oh, all on the
1,
same side?
2, 3. Yeah, and they're all healed. It may be that these 2 injuries are contemporary. So they happened at the same time because they are very well healed.
A bang on the head and cracked ribs?
Yeah. So you could interpret that 2 ways. You could say, well, somebody's hit him on the head and in the ribs, leading to those injuries, or he's fallen and hit his rib cage and his head at the same time, and he's sustained those injuries.
There were 5 burials, but most unusually, 3 of them, including the one I'd helped to excavate, each had a pewter chalice and pattern, the ceremonial cup and plate used for communion. Whoever this man was, I was sure that he had a fascinating story to tell.
This is the best preserved burial, the one that's in this stone-lined kist. It's almost like a coffin, but made up of different slabs of stone. It looks even clearer now, the burial that partly lay over the top of it's been removed, and it all seems to be here. The idea of a kist is that you build a grave and line it with slabs of stone, but normally these are much earlier. In medieval times you've usually got a complete stone coffin, but not in this case. I don't know, it's difficult to say when it's dirt, but I think that a number of these vertebrae look as if they fused together, which is a sign of degenerative disease. That's what it looks like. I mean, this looks like a solid mass here rather than a series of separate bones. I mean, this should be about 3 or 4 separate vertebrae, but it's one solid fused mass right the way through there. Okay, thank you. Right, now if we can sort of pack it round. Well, the last bits of this burial need to come out, and there's just the skull left and also very nice chalice right next to it. And of course the skull seems to be lying partly over the chalice, which does seem in very good condition, and the stem of it seems to be coming down here with the foot resting on top of this stone.
The chalices, lifted out in blocks of soil, looked as if they might be our most important clue.
Now, the burial I've just helped to excavate is very unusual for Meet the Ancestors, because I think it's the first time that we've been certain of the profession of the person in the grave. Because that man was buried with a pewter chalice, and that means that he was a priest. But when did he die? And what was his role in the history of this cathedral and of the city?
By the end of the dig, we were sure that the burials were medieval. But the ground level around the cathedral had been lowered by some 3 feet during the Victorian restoration work, so it was hard to tell precisely in which century the burials had taken place. But there were some clues. Stone kists were used throughout the Middle Ages, but the chalices suggested the 13th century, as did the pottery recovered from around the graves.
It's incredibly disorientating walking up. Your body wants to compensate in that direction, which means you're leaning onto the wall, at the same time as you're spiralling round in a circle and going upwards. It's good to see some daylight and get your sense of direction and space again.
The tower is 8 stories high, with its famous lean just under 4 degrees off-centre. Our 3D scans reveal a skeleton image of the tower, and it can help us see how the medieval builders tried to correct the lean. Things started to go wrong almost from the word go. After just 3 stories had been completed, it became clear the tower was leaning. Soft clay and sandy soil had destabilised the foundations. Work stopped for almost 100 years. But then they tried a novel solution. They made stories 4, 5, 6 and 7 shorter on one side to try to compensate for the lean. It didn't help, of course.
Incredible sense when you climb this building is one of both human fallibility. They didn't realise that the foundations were on sinking ground, but also perseverance. For 200 years, the Pisans tried to make this tower work, building little by little, until finally they got to the bell tower on the top.
The Pisans never gave up trying. In one last attempt, the top itself was added at a jaunty angle to the rest. At least the Pisans had completed their tower. In 1372, Florence's cathedral had stood domeless for 76 years.
How are you?
Monica Bietti is the director of Michelangelo's chapel at San Lorenzo, and her enthusiasm for the place is infectious.
So this is the work of Michelangelo?
Yes, all the work of Michelangelo. The architecture, the sculpture.
These are, I mean, obviously very famous sculptures now of Michelangelo. Can you tell me a little bit about them?
I explain to you. This is the night. The night look like the moonlight.
Yes.
Look, the marble is shining and is so white, like the moonlight. This is the day. What I think is that is the beginning of the day when the shadows are not definitely.
I like it.
I like it.
I like it.
This
I like it a lot.
Is my interpretation.
But this is very unusual for a sacristy. These kinds of personifications, night and day. Are these representative of Michelangelo's view of the world, of the cosmos, perhaps?
Michelangelo and also Medici, because this kind of chapel is like a symbol of the life that finish, you know, but the art remain. And the art of the Medici remain for all the time.
Unlike the marble sculptures, the relationship between the Medici and Michelangelo didn't stand the test of time. In 1527, the people of Florence rose up against the Medici and they were forced into exile. Michelangelo refused to go with them. The great artist stayed in Florence and joined the rebels.
So Medici commissioned Michelangelo to build this and to sculpt these buildings.
Yes.
Then the Medici are expelled from the city.
Yes, right.
Michelangelo then takes the side of the city, of the Republic of Florence, against the Medici.
Against the Medici.
And then the Medici come back to take power, and now he's their enemy.
And so he was really afraid. Michelangelo remained in a secret space for 3 months. but nobody knows where. So do you want to see?
Yes, I do.
I can show it to you.
Where do we go?
There.
Where are we going now?
Down there.
Down.
This is the door.
Yes.
So this is where Michelangelo was hiding.
Yes.
This is not somewhere the public can go.
No, this is really secret. It will remain open.
We won't get trapped.
Yes.
Feels like we're underground.
Yes. But look on the left, there is a window.
This.
Yes.
Michelangelo wrote that he hid in a tiny cell, entombed like the dead Medici above, though hiding from a live one. To forget my fears, I fill the walls with drawings. For over 4 centuries, nobody was able to find where this tiny cell was. Then, in 1975, during some building work, this little room was discovered.
This is the later.
The authenticity of the drawings has been debated, but many, including Monica, are convinced they're the work of Michelangelo.
But this face, I recognize this face. As a classical art, this is the Lair one.
Yes.
This is the sculpture that Michelangelo discovers in the ground in Rome. And
do you recognize this one? What is?
That's a David.
David.
Of Michelangelo's. That's his foot.
Yes.
And that's the one that got hammered on.
In every part you can recognize the thing that he did.
It's like an autobiography through art of his life and career today. When you are terrified for your life, hiding in an underground chamber, it's incredible.
It's incredible.
So Gianluca, where are we? This is the Bourbon Tunnel.
Yeah.
So this is the escape tunnel
Yeah.
for the king to go from the palace and the Piazza del Plebiscito to the
barracks.
To the military barracks. Wow.
The king was very worried, Ferdinand II, so he decided to dig a tunnel.
But this is a huge tunnel.
Yeah,
You don't...
because he was a king.
It's so big because the Bourbon tunnelers joined together all the tuffo quarries under here that had helped to build Naples. And its uses didn't end there. After World War II, it was even a dump for abandoned vehicles. As our scanning team begins the task of making sense of this labyrinth, we're going to look at what went on down here during the Second World War.
Come with me, I want to show you something from the World War II. A bomb shelter.
Naples was the most bombed Italian city in World War II. It's estimated that Allied raids killed more than 20,000 people.
Look there. We have found the beds, the original. And the toys for children.
Oh.
Look, come in me. You can read alarm 26 April 43. And here, noi vivi. We are still alive. Because it was better to stay than stay outside under the bombing.
Nearly 200 kilometers of tunnels were cleared and electricity cables laid to cater for the hundreds of thousands of Neapolitans forced to shelter from Allied bombing. But life went on.
When we dig here, we found this green color, as you can see.
Are you sure you want to be doing that?
Try, please. Don't be afraid.
Is that hair lotion?
Yeah, a very old.
That's like when you go to the old barber shop.
Exactly.
How?
70 years old.
70 years?
It works.
And it hasn't changed. I mean,
Yeah.
That's incredible. Do you use it yourself occasionally when you're down here?
No, I prefer not. Okay.
But that is extraordinary.
Yes, very nice.
I love the fact that this tunnel was originally built to save one man, a king. It never did, but it ended up saving thousands of people
as a bomb shelter during the Second World War.